Welcome, good afternoon. Welcome at this webinar today for Reorganization, your business structure here in the Netherlands during Corona times. My name is Bart Brinkman and engage with business development at Bridge Legal and Finance. Today we have an interesting webinar, but please allow me to say a few things about Bridge Legal and Finance. We have around 90 associates and we cover most of the legal fields like corporate law, immigration, tax law and labor law. But we also cover the more practical solutions like accounting, bookkeeping, HR, and payroll in the Netherlands and payroll across Europe. Also, we have a dedicated Japan desk and a Korea desk. Well, for today, we have an interesting topic, and it consists of two speakers, two of my fellow colleagues. The first speaker is Feline van Laarhoven. She is a Senior Law Associate, Labor Law. And the second speaker is Esme Stormer, HR Business Partner. My other colleague, Martijn Link, is the moderator today, and you can post your questions during the chat function during the webinar. We have two types of chat functions. The one is the more confidential one for the company. You can ask in the private chat, and the more general questions you can pose during the public chat. After the two presentations, we will handle some of the questions, and later on we will also share them with you. All right, let's not wait any longer. I would like to give the floor to my colleague Feline to start the first presentation. Please enjoy the webinar.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining this webinar, and thank you for the introduction, Bart. As he mentioned, I will be talking about the reorganizations from an employment law perspective. And I just wanted to indicate why we have chosen reorganization as a topic for this webinar. It is a very actual topic, certainly due to the COVID-19 situation we are in, the pandemic, which is affecting companies worldwide, but of course also in the Netherlands. And we hear from a lot of clients that they are considering closing down their business altogether because of the situation they are in. And we believe that sometimes there are other solutions than closing down a business permanently, such as reorganizing the company and hopefully only for a temporarily period of time, maybe, have your business a little bit smaller than you might be used to, but then hopefully in the long run, in a couple of months, maybe a year, come back to the situation you were prior COVID-19. So we would like to address reorganization in the Netherlands, and I will take you through a couple of steps. We have decided to indicate 5 steps that you would need to take for this reorganization. And the first, second, and third step are actually steps that you would also need when you actually file for a termination application at the UWV. That is the Employee Insurance Agency that we work with here in the Netherlands, in order to gain a permit to terminate employees' contracts. So those 3 steps are necessary for this reorganization, but also are very important when going to the UWV. Step 4 will indicate a little bit how you submit an application at the UWV, or if you decide to negotiate settlement agreements with the employees, how to do that. And step 5 is to communicate a decision of the UWV to the employee. So let's start with the first step, which is the business case. And we believe that this step is the most important, essential step in this whole reorganization process. If you don't know why your company is affected, which department is affected, what you want to do in the short term and in the long run, you cannot convince a UWV, nor can you convince an employee of signing a settlement for dismissal. So these are the steps we have indicated, and it starts with maybe a very obvious step. Take a thorough look at the structure of your organization. It might seem very simple, and you might think, well, of course I know what my organization looks like, but it could be that, during the company has changed over the last couple of years, departments have changed, employees have decided or have gone into different positions, different levels. So it is very important to be able to indicate and have a good structure chart, organizational chart in place, indicating where everyone within the position or within the organization is working. And also, does the organization perhaps consist of various international entities? Because that is also important at a later stage in the process. Well, after you have a good indication of your company, it is important to understand which section of the organization has financially been affected. And this could be the entire company, but it could also, for example, only be one department. If one department works with on certain projects and the client of that project has decided to, and maybe has been liquidated due to the COVID situation, it could be that only that department is affected. That does not mean that other sections of your department will be affected by the reorganization. So try to really indicate which section of the organization has been affected most. And what was the main cause of turnover? Because we are talking about COVID, of course, but it could be that since a year or something, the company is already struggling financially on certain aspects, and that the COVID is only the final tipping over point of the company. So was it sudden or was it expected that this could happen? Another important point in the business case is to determine how long the organization can survive if you don't take any action at all. This is, of course, important for yourself to know. When do we need to take action? Can we maybe wait for 2 months, or do we need to take action now? But it is also an important point for the UWV application, the procedure, because they will check, they will ask for a prognosis for the coming 26 weeks, so 6 months in advance. What will the company look like if you do nothing, and what will the company look like if you do take action? Important to note, we are talking here with this reorganization mainly about the redundancy of staff. But of course, it is also possible before you get to that point to maybe take other measures that will save costs. Perhaps it is possible to move to another office space, a smaller office space. People are working from home now, mostly. Maybe employees are always getting a bonus payout every year. It could be a possibility to withhold that bonus for this year and therefore see for a couple of months longer if you can survive with all the employee workforce that you have in place now. Please note that the UWV will also look at all other measures that have been taken already. Termination of the employees' contracts should be the last and ultimate remedy for a reorganization. And then lastly, point 5 would be to determine what organizational changes are essential. So it could be the ones I mentioned before, but it could also be personnel and the loss of staff. And here you could look into situations of fixed term contracts that will be ending automatically anyway, to not renew them. But it could also be terminating and parting ways with employees with indefinite contracts. So step 1, the business case, very important to have in place for yourself, but also for a possible application procedure at the UWV. And the second slide will indicate a little bit what the UWV sees as a reasonable ground for termination. So if this loss of workforce is inevitable, the company must be able to substantiate one of the following reasonable grounds. And I have listed these reasonable grounds in the sheet, so you can have a look. And please note that it is also possible to combine these grounds with each other. So you could say there is a decrease in the available work, but also there are organizational changes that need to be made in order for the company to keep its head above water. So as a conclusion, the UWV would want to know in this first step if structural job losses must be the result of measures that are necessary for an efficient business operation. After you have decided what needs to happen, it is of course important to indicate which section of the workforce must become redundant in order to achieve this goal. And please note that we first look at positions and then we look at individuals. So we have divided step 2 into redundancy of positions, and then later we will allocate which individual will need to the company would need to part ways with. And when you look at these positions that need to be made redundant, it is important to check the following scenarios. Is it a whole department that becomes redundant, or perhaps a unique position, or maybe a group with interchangeable positions? On the sheet, we have indicated the difference between a unique position and an interchangeable position. And it is very important to understand how many positions are becoming redundant and where these positions in this organizational chart are. And the reason why it is important to have that in mind is because it's much easier to convince the UWV, for example, to make an entire department become redundant than if you need to substantiate that one employee from each department is becoming redundant. If your business case really indicates this group is losing projects, so this entire group is no longer needed within the company, you can easily say, well, the whole department needs to become redundant. And it will also make it easier when we look at the second step to allocate the individuals to these positions. So what happens if it's not an entire department or in a unique position? If that is not the case, we strongly recommend to rank the personnel into different groups of workers. So really get a good idea of external employees, employees with a retirement age, indefinite contracts, fixed term contracts, 0-hour contracts. Get to know your workforce, and really try to see where everyone is situated in the company. Also check if their job descriptions are still accurate, if they are actually stating what the employees in the company are actually doing. So after you have decided which positions become redundant, it is important to decide which individuals are to be made redundant. And as mentioned before, if it's an entire department, it will be easy. But if only, for example, you have a department marketing and only one person from marketing will need to be made redundant because cost efficiently, you want to keep a couple, but one of them needs to go, you need to highlight who this individual is in accordance with the principle of reflection. This is the principle in Dutch law, and there are a few aims of this principle which we have listed below. And that is to mainly safeguard the age spread of the workforce, that it stays the same before and after the reorganization. What they want to prevent is that, for example, only people who have been working at the company for a very long time and are perhaps already approaching the retirement age to part ways with them and have a very young workforce left. That is not what the law states that you can do. So to ensure an objective, non-personal approach to decide who is made redundant or not, you need to select these individuals in accordance with the principle of reflection. So no cherry picking by the employer. That is what it comes to. I would just like to give one example in the sheet before to make it a little bit more clear maybe. So let's again say we have a department with marketeers. You have 5 marketeers and they're all in the same age group. At that point, if you need to part ways with one, it will be easy. You can pick the one who joined the company last. They will need to go out first. So it's the last in, first out principle. However, if these marketeers are in different age groups, for example, 4 of them are in a separate age group, or 3 of them, and then 2 are in the same age group, and you would need to pick which one needs to become redundant, you first look at the age group with the most amount of employees. So that will be the one with the 2 employees. And then from there, you pick the last in, first out. So this is quite a complicated principle. This is a very easy example, but there are a lot of things to take into consideration. For example, are there people on fixed term contracts? When will their contracts end? Do they need to be put in this ranking system? or perhaps someone has a prohibition of termination because they're sick or if they're pregnant. There are lots of details in this principle of reflection that need to be taken into consideration. So we really recommend, if you have to work with this, to ask for legal assistance to help you and make sure that you pick the right employees for dismissal. Once you have done that, you arrive at step 3. And also this step is important because it is the last box you need to check if you go to the UWV to file for termination. And this step is that even though you have selected someone you want to part ways with, you still need to reassign or try and reassign this person in another position, another suitable position within the organization. And this might seem a little bit odd, as you want to save costs by getting rid of employees. And if you reassign them in another position, you will still have the same costs. However, this is a step that should not be ignored, as the UWV will check it. So it is important and a legal obligation to actively try to reassign the selected employee, with or without training, in another suitable position within the organization. And this obligation lasts for the duration of the notice period of that employee. And the notice period depends on how long the employee has been employed with the company, and needs to be, you need to count it as from the moment that permission of the UWV is granted. So let's say that an employee has a notice period of 2 months, and the UWV gives off a permit on December 1st. You still have the month of December and January, in which you already at this stage have to look ahead. Will there be any position available for an employee until February 1st? So it is important to keep track of this timeline. So we've made a checklist here, so you can use this when you have arrived at step 3. Check all open job vacancies. Important is that this is in your organization in the Netherlands, but also outside of the organization. If you maybe have an entity in Germany or in the US, wherever, doesn't matter, you need to check if there are suitable positions there. If the employee has to accept that position or not is a different story, but as a company, you have at least the obligation to offer that position to the employee. Important as well is not only search for these positions, but also offer them to the employee, discuss them, talk about it. So keep checking, keep searching, keep communicating the above on a regular basis. So when you've done these 3 steps, you are, as a company, prepared to submit a UWV application or have a discussion with the employees who become redundant and see if they want to settle with a mutual agreement. And submitting the UWV application is, of course, only feasible if you have a good case. So you need to be able to substantiate your reason for dismissal at the reasonable grounds we talked about earlier. But if you have a good case, you can either file this application or have a fruitful discussion with the employees to try and reach the mutual agreement. Well, the UWV application consists of 3 parts, and it can be filed at the UWV online. Part A and B are really straightforward. It's just some details of the company and details of the employees who are being put forward for dismissal. But Part C, that is the tough bit, and that Part C actually is step 1, 2, and 3, as we just discussed. So the application has to be submitted in the Dutch language, which is also sometimes for our clients a little bit of a hassle, of course. We're happy to help. And the UWV application, that is a nice thing, is very straightforward in that sense that they really indicate which questions need to be answered, what information they need for substantiation. So really look through that application well and come with a thorough application when you're filing. So as I mentioned, Part C is the most important bit. It covers steps 1 through 3. And I listed a short recap here. Step 1, the business case. What is happening? Why is there a loss of turnover? What has caused it? Make sure that structural job losses are a result of measures that are necessary for efficient business operation for economic reasons. Then step 2, which position becomes redundant and which individual is linked to this position, and make sure that the individual is selected according to the principle of reflection. Step 3 is to always check and look if the individual who is being made redundant could be reassigned to another suitable position within the company or in the group. So I indicated that the application consists of 3 parts, A, B, and C. A and B being quite easy, C a little bit more extensive, and there is a possibility to file the complete application straight at once. So a complete application would mean that the moment the UWV receives it, the procedure will start. It takes about 4 to 7 weeks for the UWV to come to a decision. But another option would be to only file the preliminary application. So only file part A. You don't need to give any confidential information away. You only indicate to the UWV that you as a company wish to put forward a couple of employees for dismissal, and you ask them for 2 weeks of time to discuss a mutual agreement with the employees. If you reach a mutual agreement, if you have a signed settlement agreement in place, you can withdraw the application. If that is not the case, you can still submit Part B and C and have the UWV commence the procedure and ask them for a decision. We always advise the latter, so to file a preliminary UWV application first. And the reason is that reaching a settlement agreement with the employees is usually a quicker process. It usually has less legal costs involved. And of course, you do not run any risk in the sense that when the employee signs for the settlement agreement, you know what arrangements are in place. And there's no risk of the UWV refusing to give permission. And there's also no risk of appeal. Another positive thing is when reaching a mutual settlement agreement is that the employee's right to unemployment benefits are normally protected. But please note, it does require written consent from the employee. So make sure that the settlement package is appealing, which we will go into now, but also that you have a good underlying file in place. Because if you don't have that, the employee will probably say, well, I'm not going to settle with you. I'd rather prefer to go to the UWV because I am of the opinion that the UWV will not grant permission for my termination. So what is a good settlement agreement, or what is a good settlement severance package? Well, this really depends on how strong your case is. If you have a really strong case, your minimum settlement package could equal the package that they would be getting if the UWV grants the permission to terminate the contract. So upholding the notice period, paying out the transition payment, and paying out any accrued but untaken vacation days. But it could be possible, and that is usually the case, that the employee would like to receive a little bit more because they are also causing the employer not to go to the UWV. There is no risk, they have no appeal, so they need another incentive to sign for this agreement. So usually an extra severance payment is offered, or perhaps paid garden leave, or perhaps a signing bonus if they sign before a certain date. So it is, of course, very positive if you have signed employment or signed settlement agreements in place. But if you need to part ways of, for example, 10 or 15 employees, it could fairly be that you have reached agreement with 3 or 4, but you still have started a procedure, commenced the procedure with the UWV. so parts B and C, for the other employees. And then you need to await the decision from the UWV. During the procedure of the UWV, the employee is still employed. So that's something to consider. They are not on garden leave, they're still employed and should be doing what they have been doing until that time. So there are two scenarios. UWV can either grant permission or not. And if they grant it, the permission needs to be used within 4 weeks. Well, that's usually not a problem, because when you have a permission, you want to use it and you will use it, but make sure that you do that within that time frame. The procedural time of the UWV could be taken, subtracted from a long notice period. And it is important that the company prepares the financial settlement on the end date of the contract. The employee can appeal the UWV decision, so make sure, be aware of that at least. The second scenario is a little less positive scenario, is that the UWV does not grant permission and the employee remains employed. Although new negotiations are still possible, it could be that the employee does not want to renegotiate, or that they ask for a very high severance package because they know that UWV has already decided in their favor. In this case, the company can appeal the UWV decision if needed. And lastly, this is some special situations that can arise. As I mentioned before, it is of course possible that the company you are in is quite a big company, maybe 100 or 200 people, and the company has a works council or a staff representation board. It is important that if you have such a committee and you are reorganizing, that the company needs to request and receive their advance before the company can decide to reorganize. Also, with smaller companies, it could be the case that you need to inform the personnel of your reorganization upfront if 25% of the staff is becoming redundant. So please note that these are steps that need to be taken into consideration if your reorganization is really big. Another one, when you are deciding to let go of 20 or more employees within a time frame of 3 months, you need to make sure that additional rules apply that are laid down in the Collective Dismissal Act. So also there, additional rules could apply. Another more up-to-date thing to take into consideration is that the Dutch government has been providing governmental aid to companies due to the COVID situation. The noodregel overbrugging werkgelegenheid, now 1, now 2, and at the moment we are in now 3. And now 3 does not prevent a company from terminating employees, their contracts, while they are receiving funding, but please do take into consideration that extra rules apply. So make sure that if you are receiving that you are aware of these rules. Well, this was in a nutshell reorganization in the Netherlands, and I would now like to introduce my colleague Esme Storm, who will take you through the process from an HR perspective, because it is also very important, apart from the legal side, to approach the reorganization from a more human side, and she can do that best. So thank you for your attention, and I will give the floor to Esme now.
Yeah, good afternoon, and thank you, Felina, for explaining to us the technical and legal side of things. And of course, labor law and HR are very, very closely linked to each other, which is why we've decided to combine our strengths in this presentation to give you both sides of the story, because I truly believe that actually the success of a reorganization is at least for 50% dependent actually on how you communicate about it and how you support your employees in that going forward. As Bud and I think Felina already said, I am an HR business partner. So my team at advises clients on all kinds of HR topics, and including the soft side of HR, as you might want to call it, regarding communication, especially then in this presentation with relations to reorganization. I have a number of tips for you. It's a slight change of, what's the word? A slight change of gear. It's obviously a very different subject matter than the technical, more legal side of things. But I hope that you can kind of change gear with me and put your mind to thinking about the practicalities of the communication. My very first tip, and absolutely very, very important, is when you're planning, you know, your business case and all these things, that you also make a planning of your communication. Not only should you make a planning for your communication, but you should also stick to it. And that's where it often goes wrong. So although when a company decides that they need to reorganize, they might do an initial communication to the staff, and then things go quiet, or at least in the eyes of the staff, that they don't see what is happening. But it's very important to make sure that once you make a communication plan, that you also stick to it. So I very much recommend to appoint somebody whose sole job is making sure that every 2 weeks on Friday or whatever it is, that there is a message that goes out to staff, informing them of any developments that there are. And I'd like to also make the side note there that no news can also be news. So even if you have nothing new to report when you might have expected to, let the staff know that. Let them know when they are likely to hear that. In your communication plan, you're also going to be thinking about all the different stakeholders you have. So typically we have the staff that are going to be impacted, and with that we often mean the staff that are going to be made redundant. But don't forget as well that you have the people that are staying behind. You have the managers who need to manage the people day to day in the meantime while you're waiting for the UWV decision or for a settlement agreement, and also the Works Council or Employee Representation Board. And it's important to think at each stage of the communication about who should be doing the communication. Should this be the senior management? Should it be HR? Should it be the manager? In order to get a very transparent and clear communication, I would advise to have the main communication going through one person, by, for example, the CEO of the company, because as soon as you filter down and maybe the CEO informs the department managers, then they have their interpretation of what has been said and bring that over to the employees. It could be that employees are getting different messages, and we don't want that to happen. So make a plan, think about who needs to be included in that, stick to it. Also prepare and plan to make supporting documents, FAQs, for example, frequently asked questions about the reorganization, and add to that as you get more questions from your staff. And next to sending out official communication every 1 or 2 weeks, it's also very important, I think, to have individual meetings or calls with the staff in question, either by the manager or HR, just to check in with them and to see how they are doing, how they are feeling, give them the opportunity maybe for a walk-in in order to be able to ask questions, but just to keep the communication open. So normally with a reorganization, and I think Felina touched on this, is there is a point where you need to inform all of your staff that the intention is to reorganize. And at that point, you can, that there are a number of best practices that I have here, which are actually, I realized as I was making the presentation, are really kind of worst practices, because this is where it usually goes wrong. In all the reorganizations I've encountered in my career, this is where sometimes things are forgotten, people are left out, and these are the things that are pain points for those involved. So yeah, please learn from that experience and make sure that your reorganization is successful and does tick the boxes, as it were. So a number of tips. The first one, invite the participants for a meeting at short notice. The inference is really on the at short notice. So do not, or at least I would not recommend to let people know a week in advance that there's going to be an all office meeting or an all company meeting, because they were going to start to worry about what that entails, especially if it's not in your normal common practice to do this every quarter or something like that. So invite the participants on the morning, for example, itself of the day that you are going to make the announcement, so that people don't start speculating, get uneasy, register sick, those kind of things. These rules actually, or rules of thumb for communicating bad news apply to all kinds of situations, so not just to reorganizations. So they're important when contracts are not being extended, or if you have to tell somebody that their performance is not up to scratch. Any situation where you have to bring bad news, it's good to keep these things in mind. So my second point would be to come straight to the point and keep it professional. That's really two things. On the one hand, keep it professional as opposed to personal. That generally applies on a one-on-one meeting a little bit more. So if somebody hasn't been performing, but you're making them redundant, there's no need to talk about them not performing and saying, well, you weren't performing anyway. Then you're making it personal. So avoid doing that and keep to the factual. We are reorganizing. Unfortunately, that means something for your job. We're coming straight to the point. That's an interesting one. I see that go wrong so often. So in a one-on-one meeting, it's often that the first 10 minutes of the meeting are spent in kind of nervous small talk before you get to the point of the actual meeting. That's to be avoided because that makes the employee very, very uneasy. At the same time, a 10-minute monologue about how badly things are going in the company and how serious the consequences are going to be is also not desirable, because your employees will be sitting there the whole time and the only thing they are hearing is their own voice in their head saying, what does this mean for me? Are they going to lay us all off? So then you make the whole group nervous, whereas actually that's not necessary. So I very much recommend to keep it very, very short. You can expand on the reasons and the figures and all those things on it later, but do sort of get a clear structure to your story, to your narrative that you want to present to the staff and stick to it, starting with the bad news. So you would say, you know, finances haven't been going very well, and then the COVID-19 crisis came along, and that's just made things worse. And unfortunately, that means that we've had to decide to reorganize, and that's going to have consequences for some of you, and we are going to have to make X number of people redundant, for example. Once you've come in with a bombshell like that, depending on how much you've already informed your employees about your financial situation, be aware that they will need time to let this sink in, and that they will also probably respond quite emotionally or not. It really depends on the person, but allow space for that. Allow the space to respond, not just ask questions, but also to respond. Explain what the next steps and the timelines are going to be, and explain to them what support might be available to them. And you might not be able to do that in the first meeting, because the first meeting might just be to say that there's going to be a reorganization and you don't know who it's going to hit yet. But at the time that you do know that it's going to hit this whole department, for example, then you can say, and what we're going to do to help you transition well is this, this, and this. So to give them a little bit of a comfort there as well. Be very prepared and be conscious that you're going to need to repeat this message, both in the meeting and afterwards, because people, their thoughts are taking over their mind, they're shocked, they're not listening properly, they're worrying about their own concerns at that moment. So you may think that the questions are a little bit irrelevant or a little bit strange, but don't worry about that. Just carefully and gently explain it again. And for this reason, that people don't listen properly or don't hear properly when they are stressed or shocked about something, I'd always recommend that you have your message down on paper as well, with the most important points so they can take it away with them and process it at home. You might even consider letting people go home the rest of the day to let it process, or to process it, or to make people available to talk with them if they would already like to. That could be the manager, or it could be HR, for example. Or you might want to say, well, go home and think about it. Tomorrow and Thursday, there's going to be somebody available at the office if you have questions, and there will be a walk-in, for example. You really need to look at what works best in your organization. How do you communicate normally? But they're just ideas to do this part well. So again, I think I said it before, stay in dialogue with employees that are being made redundant. And of course, yes, you need to do that for them because that would help them to transition well, but it also will keep them being an ambassador for your organization afterwards. So when they're at parties, not that there's many parties at the moment with COVID, but when they're able to go back to their normal lives, they're not going to be speaking negatively about you as an employer or posting negative reviews on Indeed or LinkedIn or whatever. It's also very important because the employees that are being made redundant, if they are not being put on non-active straight away or on garden leave, they will be a big influencer in the atmosphere within the team. If they are motivated and feel that they're being looked after, they won't be and well informed actually, they won't be spending time speculating, gossiping, and bringing down other employees with them. And ultimately, you're reliant on the rest of your staff to stay and help you through this difficult time as a company. And the last point is that obviously, even though they're going to be made redundant, you don't want them to fall out sick in the meantime, really, partly because that's not a very good reference for you, as they're not very good ambassadors if you've let them get stressed, but also because you actually probably need them in the meantime to continue your business and also to relieve others, because generally you will see there will be a real dip in motivation within the whole company. So you can really do without people having to do extra work and go the extra mile because they are, because they have sick employees. So it's really in everyone's interest, the employer and the employee, to make sure that they are okay. My next slide, this is a very theoretical curve. I don't know if anybody has seen it before. I've always found this very useful in helping and supporting employees through reorganization. This is the same as a bereavement curve, so you might have even seen it in your own private circle. It's about how people deal with change and how they transition through that. And also change could be the loss of a loved one, but it can also be losing your job, for example. And so you see on the left-hand side, you see the level of the morale or the motivation of the employee, and on the bottom you see the time as it goes. Now, of course, nobody is standard. Nobody goes through every single phase of this one by one, but it is useful to identify when you're speaking with your employees, at what stage are they at, and what do they need then at that time, and what can they hear. So, for example, when you've just told the news, they're in shock. Their morale is still okay. They're just shocked. They can't take things in. That means probably you're going to have to repeat things an awful lot. They're not going to hear everything you say. After that, they're going to be being in denial and think, no, but surely that can't be true. And maybe, surely the figures aren't as bad as you make out. Of course, you can give them a little bit of, reflection on that and help them realize what is true. And it's very important in that to manage their expectations so that you don't pander to them and say, oh, well, yeah, no, maybe they will change their mind. That's not going to happen. It's important to be clear and consistent in your story, in your narrative, because people are people. We hear what we want to hear quite often. So be careful you don't fall into that trap and have someone said, but you told me I was going to get this or do that later. Now, equally so, if somebody is frustrated, they're angry, they start looking back at everything they've lost, they're angry with the company can't do anything right. So even if you're doing all of these recommendations, you're still not doing it right. And you see that there's a phase where people are really kind of taking sort of hold of what they're losing. They're looking very much backwards to what has been before, when times were better. And they are likely to want to also blame somebody. And this is when you come into the depression stage a little bit, that you'll start to see that employees might blame you as HR or the manager or whoever, anyone who's around them, anyone but themselves, blame them for the situation. And I have found it an interesting picture of the dip there at the bottom, that it's kind of like, at that point, it's like being in a swimming pool and having to push off from the bottom and come back up. And sometimes it might mean that you have to be that swimming pool floor, and that means that you will have to take some accusations. But the important thing is maybe not to rise to them, because they're in an emotional state at that moment, and they're not going to be open to reason. So you can recognize, acknowledge their feeling. You can correct any facts that are not right, but it's probably best to come back to them a bit later, when they're being more rational and be able to talk about it. Then hopefully the employees go to a stage of experiment, which is where they are starting carefully to look forward to the future, to see what the future might bring, whether they're staying in the company or they're leaving. They might start thinking about their future career and how this could be an opportunity for them, actually. They will have questions, they might have doubts as well about the future, but this is the time to really engage them. And if they identify, for example, a problem, like, well, how are we going to solve that if I'm going to stay, that you make them owner of that problem too with you, and help them to think with you in terms of solution and in terms of future plans, because then they will have much more buy-in in the new organization. And then eventually, at the end of all of this, they will hopefully get to a stage of integration and acceptation, where they are completely aligned with the new thing. It's sad what's happened in the past, that their colleagues have maybe been made redundant, but they're still aligned with you and walking with you. And as I said, this curve, I find it useful, but please don't take it as a strict curve that everybody follows the steps at the same time. One day you can be in one place, another day in another place. You can go backwards and forwards, and there's no set timeline for how long this process takes. One person changes quicker than another. But I've certainly found this really, really useful in identifying this when talking to employees who are going through change, and adapting my approach to them. So here are a few other tips. As I say, a regular check-in with staff to see how they are feeling. So quite often with a reorganization, what happens is that the employees are informed that you're going to be stopping with them, and then you're waiting for all the procedural things to be taken care of before they hear anything else. And that's really the worst thing you can do, because they are left in a kind of limbo. It's really important to help them to embrace the change and to make sure that they can move on well, again, maintaining your name as a good ambassador, and maybe even recommending your company to friends or family later on, or who knows, even coming back and being employed again in the future if you haven't upset them in the way that the reorganization has been done. Be mindful also, I think a lot of, certainly if you're not an HR person, maybe just a line manager, you can often think in a meeting, well, what does this person want from me? They're giving a lot of stuff, they're telling me a lot of things, what do they want? And again, depending on the phase, they might just want someone to listen and say, I hear you, I know it's a horrible situation, and for what it's worth, I think you're dealing with it very well, or I appreciate the fact that you don't talk about it the whole day with all your colleagues and bring them down with you, for example. The next point is very much again, what I said, be clear and truthful and manage those expectations. Be careful of making promises you cannot keep. So in a moment, you might sort of say, well, yeah, I was talking to someone the other day and they're looking for a new office manager, so maybe I can put you in contact with them, only to find out that they're not really looking for another office manager, or you realize I wouldn't actually recommend this person as their office manager. So then you just do not come back on it, do not say anything. So I certainly would avoid that. Be very, very clear and honest in your communication. Don't give false hope, because it will only work detrimentally in the long run. Now, next to that, with these regular check-ins with employees, you can also help in practical ways. That really depends on the company, depends on the budget that you have for that, and how important it is for you and your company culture to help people to move on well. What you often see is that there might be an internal training given for how to best use your LinkedIn profile, or to offer a CV check, to make sure your CV is up to date and compliant with the going trends. For example, if you're having several redundancies, you can actually get these trainings quite cheap for one afternoon or 2.5 hours even, and then for all the staff that are having to look for new jobs. Again, these are little things that you can do don't always have to cost much money, but gives the employee the feeling that they are being supported and that their employer is not being disloyal to them, because I think that's a feeling that a lot of employees have. Like, I've worked here so hard, you know, I've worked through holidays, I've given up so much to work here, and now when it suits the company, they're getting rid of me. And you can really soften that by making them land a little bit more carefully. So there's a number of things you can do. You can also advise them, for example, or give them coaching on how to improve their employability, or recommend temping agencies maybe where they need to get information. You can network them. As I said, you could say, well, I know somebody who's actually looking for someone. If you send me your CV, I can forward it to them. Do that if you can, and if you're invested in that, you believe in that. But make sure you actually do it then, and be clear about the expectation. I can't guarantee anything, but I'm happy to share it with this person, and they will get back to you. Or it could be something very practical, just like getting advice on unemployment benefits, for example, if people will ask if they're entitled to that, how that works, when they have to register with the UWV. And the first practical point here, I've left that to last, but also, again, I think Felina touched on this, really bringing to their attention any internal vacancies that are being made redundant, or for people whose role is being made redundant. So showing them, look, here I have a vacancy, I think this might be suitable for you, would you like to apply for it, rather than waiting for them to see it on your internal internet or wherever you normally post your vacancies. So there are all things you can do to support the staff that are being made redundant through change. But I think I also mentioned before, it's really important to support those that are staying behind. In fact, they are your workforce of the future. So in some ways, they're more important. And I think the biggest waste of talent is that quite often, if the communication and the reorganization hasn't gone well, is that not only do you lose the people you have to make redundant and make the additional costs for that, but then shortly afterwards, due to a more negative working atmosphere, for example, others might leave as well. And you want to avoid that, because that only brings extra costs with it and might impact the overall success as well of your reorganization. So it's really important, again, in your communication plan, think about those who are staying behind. How do you keep them engaged? What are their concerns? And where do you want to be in a year's time? You know, whereas for the people that are leaving the company, it's only important what's going to happen between now and their end date. It's important for those that stay behind that they understand why you were doing it. Hopefully they not only understand, but they also share that view, and what you expect from them in that. Because although maybe a whole department might be being offshored or closed down, there's often some tasks that will stay behind, and the fear of those staying behind is often that they are going to have that added to their task package. So be communicative about that. Or they are also worried that it might just actually be forgotten and not done anymore. So you really need to get them engaged in thinking in solutions for that. And also for these people, I think it's just important to give them the opportunity to talk one-on-one if needed as well, so that they don't feel that they have to be grateful because they still have a job. So all the HR attention should go to those that are leaving, but that they realise that they are also suffering in the situation, and that they are valued, especially if they are really putting their shoulders underneath the whole thing and really trying to make a success of the company. Give that recognition to them publicly if need be. Again, that depends on your company culture, but really acknowledge that. So the role of the manager through this process is also really, really important in just keeping contact with both those staying behind and those leaving the company. So that's actually the end of my tips and tricks, really, that I wanted to give for the communication. I don't know if there's any questions for me, but in any case, I will hand over. Oh, I'm just seeing a question here being sent to me, so maybe I can answer that first, and then my colleague Felina will come and answer the questions about the technical parts. Yeah, that's a good question. Somebody says, do the employees have the right to be accompanied to their meetings about being made redundant as they do in the UK? To be honest, I don't know if it's actually a right. It's quite normal that they can suggest that if they want to do that in advance. It might be a family member, it might be a legal counsel. Usually the first meeting is unexpected for the employee, so they don't really have that opportunity to do that, but it's certainly a possibility. I would not recommend it being another colleague because they will receive information about salaries and things like that as well, and that can really affect the team spirit, so you could discuss that with the employee. But it could certainly be arranged, and in a later stage when you're dealing with the settlement agreement, it could be that the legal counsel from both sides might be present to decide the conditions of that, and that's quite normal here too. So I think that was the only question for me at the moment, so I'm going to hand over to Felina again for her questions. I'm just looking at our Martijn, our moderator. Do we have many questions? We don't have many questions. We only have one, it would seem, and we do have a little bit more time. So I would just say, if you have any burning general HR or employment law questions, feel free to put those now in the chat, and either myself or Felina can answer those too whilst we still have time. So thank you for your attention, and I will pass over to Felina.
Well, thank you, Esme, for your presentation and also answering the questions straight away. Sorry to put you in the spotlight for that, but I thought it would be make more sense to answer it straight away after your presentation. We also have a question relating to step 3 that we discussed, the reassigning of employees. And the question is, how close of a skill match should there be to consider? If we are talking about a suitable position, what is a suitable position? And I would love to give a very straightforward answer to this question, but unfortunately that is not really possible. But the law does indicate some things to consider. And that is, for example, the experience of the employee. How much experience does the employee have? And is a suitable position in a way aligned to that experience? But also the educational level. Of course, if you have a university degree versus no degree at all, of course, it is not suitable. So look at the education, but not only the education, also the experience and also the capacity of an employee. An employee could, of course, 2 employees could have 10 years of experience, both have a degree in a certain field, but one of them has the capacity to fulfill a certain role and the other does not. So try to see if there are any positions within the organization that match these 3 points. And important is also the training aspect. As I mentioned before, it could be that with only a certain training, the employee could be able to fulfill that position. And since that reassigning period could be pretty long, especially if the notice period of that employee is very long, if it's 4 months, you could maybe even look ahead for 4 to 5 months of time. It could be that with a certain training, an employee could be made, a certain other position could be made suitable. What is important as well is how big is the company. If you have a company with 1,000 employees, there are, of course, more available positions or more suitable available positions within the company than if you have a company with 10 employees. And as mentioned before, it is also important to look at your group. So look internationally. It could be that an employee is not willing to relocate to another country. However, if there are suitable positions in other countries, offer that to them. Then at least you as a company have done and fulfilled your obligations that you have. What is also important, which I have not mentioned before, is to also look ahead if there are maybe people on fixed-term contracts that at this moment fulfill a suitable position, which will become vacant within, for example, 3 or 4 months' time. So even though the principle of reflection has allocated 1 employee to become redundant, if they could fulfill a suitable position in 3 or 4 months' time of another employee on a fixed-term contract, then that could be seen as a suitable position. But as mentioned before, there are lots of small legal rules to take into consideration. So this is my my broad answer to your question. I hope it's helpful. But please do reach out if there are any specific questions that you might have, because it's important to check all the boxes from a legal perspective. I don't know. I'm also looking at the moderator to see if any other questions have come in, but there have not. But I will share our contact page again. So you can contact both myself at verlina@bridge.com or esme@bridge.com for any questions that you might have. Maybe you don't have them at this moment. I certainly hope that all your companies are going to survive this horrible situation that we're in. But we might need to brace ourselves with the second wave coming through the country at the moment. So stay safe, and hopefully no reorganizations are necessary. But if they are, please note that we would always be very happy to assist with any questions you might have. So you know where to contact us. And I think if there are no more questions, we can, looking at my colleague as well, we can end this webinar session about reorganization in the Netherlands from an employment and HR perspective. Thank you so much for your attention, and stay safe and have a nice day. Thank you.